No, I did not misspeak. I did not stutter. 100 billion. Ah, this must be our new
Stranger Things video. Stranger Things video. Stranger Things is an incredibly well written show. I made 2 videos about just how good season 1 was, far better than I even remembered. However, there was an obvious dip when it came to the subsequent seasons, and I did a poll asking all of you if you were glad they made the subsequent seasons, or you thought it should have stopped after season 1, and to my surprise, most of you did think it should have ended at season 1. I'm definitely not in the camp that the following seasons are bad at all, but yes, there was an obvious dip, and I wanted to explore where that began, why that actually was. Because I don't think the episode I am going to pinpoint is too much of a surprise for anyone, but I think the rationale behind it and the bigger point we're going to get to at the end are more surprising. There's a lot to say here actually, so let's just kick things off with a very fancy intro. Stranger Things video. Stranger Things video. Stranger Things video. Stranger Things video. The episode we're talking about is obviously episode 1 of season 2. I think that's the first moment the show starts to weaken, a pretty underwhelming episode in my opinion, despite actually all of the writing still technically being very good. There is a lot to love here, and that's kind of what I want to start with. We'll loosely go through the episode in order, highlighting some of the positives until we get to the bigger points I actually want to make here. So we open with the prologue, the scene involving Carly that should really be intriguing, but instead feels a bit pointless. We will get to that later. Then we get the credits, and then open with a fun, dynamic sequence where all of the kids are getting ready to meet at the arcade. It's a brilliant, pacey way to reintroduce us to them. Dustin is frantic and demanding in his search for coins, where Lucas is calmer, the exact traits we were first shown of them in season 1. Lucas has more money because he's exhibited his work ethic to mow a neighbour's lawn, where Mike, in contrast to both of them, has lost track of time. He has been under this table in his basement on a different radio frequency to usual, and something has clearly kept his mind from the arcade. It's a nice touch. He's been searching for Elle, or even if we can't tell that yet, he's clearly reminiscing on Elle. Mike hasn't entirely moved on from the events of season 1. And what's so great about this is that Mike was very much the leader of the party in season 1, where for a lot of this season he's going to be at odds with the party, the one feeling removed from it because he's still missing Elle so much. So seeing him at odds with the other two here is a nice, light, visual way to introduce that conflict before we really get to it. Anyway, because he's late, he never thought to gather any money, so he raids Nancy's piggy bank while his parents do nothing, and I think we can sense again Mike is also at odds with his family. I talked about that a lot in season 1. Will, on the other hand though, has his family very close. He is getting dropped off at the arcade by a typically anxious Joyce who is obviously still very worried about her son, whereas Will just wants to have fun. This is a nice contrast to what we saw with Mike a second before, because where Mike hasn't moved on despite Dustin and Lucas both thinking solely of the arcade here, Will wants to move on, wants to focus on just having fun and just being a kid, only his mum's anxiousness won't quite let him forget everything he went through, making them both two sides of the same coin then. One doesn't want to forget but feels like he's being made to, and the other wants to forget but feels like no one will let him. Including Mike actually, who is very alert to any signs of Will being troubled, also including the visions he keeps getting, obviously. So a really succinct contrast there, and it's what we then see play out once they reach the arcade. All of them having fun, a vague hint about someone called Mad Max being the new high score, but then Will is drawn away from all of this by a vision of the Upside Down, Mike being the one to notice and go and find him. And that sequence on its own I think tells us everything season 2 is attempting to explore, everything that's most thematically interesting about it, the struggle to move on. Everything that happened in season 1 concluded, mostly, but just because a world-ending threat is over, or at least they think it's over, doesn't mean the trauma, the grief, the feelings in general don't still linger on, and that's really difficult. What does a community do to try and put that behind them? It's what we see a lot this episode. The next scene is Murray trying to talk to Hopper about some wild theory to do with a strange Russian girl living in Hawkins that has psychic powers. Hopper shoots him down because he wants to cover that up, pretend it never happened, but he can't quite do that. It doesn't quite work. Later we get a really sweet introduction to Bob, who is just a normal guy, so down to earth, and it feels like Joyce's chance at normality. They're clearly into each other, but you can also sense slight hesitance from Joyce. Something not fully clicking, because of course she doesn't have a normal life. She's still very worried about Will. Can she just settle and live a normal life now? I also like how that scene ends with this.
Tell Jonathan not to pick anything scary. I hate scary movies.
Feels like it's a nice hint to establish Bob is not suited for the crazy supernatural adventure that goes on in Joyce's world. I mean, Bob of course will later rise to the challenge, but right now he feels at odds. So Hopper can't quite put the past behind him, Joyce can't quite do it. We then also get a scene with Will and Dr. Owens that literally tells us it's hard to just move on.
What you're saying is it's going to get worse and worse and we're just supposed to pretend like it's not happening?
It sounds counterintuitive, I know.
Followed by a shot of this gap in the wall that now has vines growing out of it. Visually, this is obvious. The wound is still there in the community. Nancy and Steve have dinner with Barb's parents, who announce that they've hired Murray as a private detective to investigate Barb's disappearance. They're selling their entire house to finance it. Finance an investigation into something Nancy knows the answer to but has been sworn to secrecy over. She breaks down crying in the bathroom, and at the same time we get this tender scene of Mike under the table again, attempting to call Elle and feeling lost without her. Those two beats, one after the other, feel like what this episode has been building to. People trying to just move on and forget, but it feels harder and harder to pretend nothing happened, and you feel that strain on them more and more, even to the point Will snaps in the next scene.
Stop treating me like that.
Well, like what?
Like everyone else does. Like there's something wrong with me. It just makes me feel like more of a freak.
You're not a freak.
Yeah, I am.
You feel that. He just wants to be a kid, but nobody will let him, and because they're all so afraid if he's okay or not, and because he isn't a normal kid, a part of him is still connected in the Upside Down, and Will hates himself for that here, hates that he isn't normal, but now Jonathan flips that whole thing on its head and provides the thematic conclusion to this episode. He says, yeah, you are a freak, so am I. That's so much more interesting than being normal, whatever normal is.
Who'd you rather be friends with? Bowie or Kenny Rogers?
Oh,
Exactly.
some people like Kenny Rogers.
Kenny Rogers. I love Kenny Rogers.
Really, really great scene. I forgot how much I loved Jonathan in season 1 and at the start of season 2. This scene doesn't resolve all of that strain that's been building across the episode, but it does hint at a possible solution. You don't have to pretend the past didn't happen. That applies to Will, to Nancy, Mike, Joyce. Will also apply to Hopper and Eleven later on. And you don't have to pretend to be normal either. Whilst a lot of what happened affected them in negative ways, it doesn't mean positive change can't grow out of it if you give it space.
Nobody normal ever accomplished anything meaningful in this world.
It's a nice resolution for the episode. A big old thematic punch, but if there's so much here I'm talking up, what the hell is wrong?
Drum roll. Class, please welcome, all the way from sunny California,
World Anvil! Oh, you better believe it's World Anvil! They are sponsoring this video, they are offering you 51% off, and they are an online tool for building worlds, you may have guessed. But also creating characters, designing and managing campaigns for all sorts of different games. My best friend uses it for D&D, but there's lots of other games. You can use it for planning your stories, writing your stories, working on all sorts of creative projects. For me, it is my novel. I need a tool like this, otherwise I am far too chaotic. We're moving flat soon, and I literally have 6 cardboard boxes full of random sheets of A4 paper I've written old ideas on. Pre-World Anviled me was a nightmare. So with something like this, not only can I keep everything organised, keep it all in one place, be able to easily edit things, but I can create timelines, I can create hyperlinks branching off specific characters or articles, or a billion other things that just make it so much easier to find stuff. Planning things can be hard, especially when there's so much to do, but having all of these tools to help visualize it, to help split everything down into specific points, articles one at a time, it helps immensely. I'm not going to show you because it's a secret, but I've created different bio pages for all of the characters in my world, even the minor ones, which house they live in, what their job is, who they're friends with, who they hate, what different beliefs they have or opinions about events that go on in a book, or whatever. So, World Anvil is great. I hope you can hear my passion, and if you desire, if you crave. If you call to the heavens for a 51% discount, then use the code TREE, or click the link in the description, or the pinned comment, or if you just want to try out the free version, then go for that. You know, there's no time limit on it. Test it out for as long as you want. World Anvil. So let's run through what's going on in everyone's story and see if you can tell me what feels missing. Mike wants to contact 11. He tries twice in this episode and fails. Well, the second time he sort of succeeds because we do hear 11's voice, but Mike mistakes it for Dustin.
Hello, was that you?
Yeah, it's me, Dustin.
He wants to find 11 but doesn't really know how to, and the rest of life keeps drawing him away from what he wants. Dustin and Lucas are fascinated with who this Mad Max is that beats Dustin's high score. When a girl then joins their class called Max, they start stalking her. They find out she is indeed Mad Max, but they just see it through the window, and then after this they go home. Joyce is worried about her son, but Dr. Owens tells her to be patient, so she tries to relax and enjoy things with Bob. Nancy and Steve are together, but Steve isn't sure he wants to go to college, and it is upsetting when they visit Barb's parents. Granted, there will be conflict around their differing feelings here later on, but not until episode 2. As far as we know right now, Steve feels the same as her. Hopper shuts down Murray about this mysterious Russian girl, and then he gets a strange report of infested pumpkins, so checks out one of the fields but doesn't learn anything and thinks nothing more of it. He then goes home where we discover he's been living with 11. Max is stalked by the other kids, so she leaves them a note saying not to stalk her. They continue regardless. Also, Billy drops her off at school, and the camera, the music, all makes a huge deal of drawing attention to him. These girls then ask,
Who is that?
and then he walks off. I could probably keep going, but I think this is enough examples. What we're missing, I think, is some drive. All of the characters are stuck in a very passive state, which isn't necessarily anything wrong, and for all the reasons I mentioned about the theme being explored here, it's quite fitting. But it means the overall story of this episode can feel like it's not progressing much. Wondering who Mad Max is and then seeing who it is, does that feel like story progression? Why does it matter? You know, why is this important? There are things characters want, or that they don't want, but they have no idea what to really do about them. Mike is stuck talking hopelessly into a radio every night. Nancy cries about Barb, but she doesn't feel there's anything she can really do. Hopper sees no need to be concerned about the pumpkins. Joyce tries to relax. Each on their own are interesting, well-written moments, but what gripped you about episode 1 for the first season was that it was immediately clear where things were going. If not like what the ultimate outcome was, you could sense the trajectory everyone was moving towards. You know, Will had disappeared. All of these characters were grappling with where he had gone, and then all of them were coming to conclusions on how best to find him. And we knew that drive was going to catapult each of their stories to a place where they start converging and clashing. The moment 3/4 of the way through that episode where Mike goes, "Screw this, Avengers assemble, let's search for Will ourselves," that's him moving out of a passive state and into an active one, and therefore it feels like progression. It's not just about what happens in the plot, it's being given the feeling of progression through active agency from the characters. And there isn't an equivalent for that for any of the characters in this episode of Season 2. They're all still basically waiting around, each with their own problems and interests, and then the episode ends. And it leaves you wondering, is episode 2 going to be any different? Are they going to wait around some more? The lack of drive at the end doesn't give you much to feel invested in. And in a lot of ways, yes. The next episode we do literally see Elle waiting around in the cabin. She does this for several episodes. Same with Will waiting around until someone takes his vision seriously. That's when the drive of the season kicks into gear. Joyce goes, "Forget what Dr. Owen says about Will, I'm going to investigate these visions," boom. That happens very late on though. I think this is primarily why people seem to say season 2 is boring or slow. Not because the events are progressing at a slow pace at all, just that we don't feel much drive from the characters until late on, much impact from them. And I get the impression the Duffer Brothers might have sensed this, because they pop in loads of little seeds, little teasers for stuff that's supposed to intrigue you this episode. Such as the scene where Billy gets out of the car and all the characters ask, "Who is that?" We don't know. There's no hint why he matters. It's not until the next episode we see his relationship to Max. You know, the camera is telling us pay attention to him, he's going to be important, but that's not really the same as cultivating intrigue in us, you know? Similarly, something weird is going on with the pumpkins, or there's something making a noise in Dustin's rubbish bin, or there's vines growing out of the wound, or Elle is here. Some little teasers like this are absolutely fine. I don't want to sound too flippant or critical there, but there are a lot here, and even then there's very little sense of how they're going to come together. And I think this is the biggest issue when it comes to Carly's introduction. Again, well written, beautifully shot, but it doesn't feel like it matters because there's no greater hint as to what this is going to come to mean in the story. There's another girl with powers. Okay, presumably she came from Hawkins, but is she going back there? Is she looking for Elle? Does she know Elle? Does Elle know her? At this point, the audience isn't technically even aware Elle is alive, and when we do see her, she has Hopper. It's not until episode 2 it becomes clear Hopper isn't fulfilling her social needs, and even then all of her focus is on wanting to see Mike again, so it's not actually until episode 5 or 6 when she starts thinking about searching for past family. Only then do we finally get a sense of what Carly might mean in the story, that she might be an alternative family to that of Hopper or Mike, a sibling who understands her. But by that point, we've long forgotten the introductory scene at the beginning of episode 1, so it doesn't really work. I don't know if I've worded that well either, but this moment is so isolated from anything else in this episode that it stops it from feeling as intriguing as it should when this is literally another girl with powers. I should be hooked. Instead, I don't care, and that's kind of because the rest of this episode leads you to forget about it rather than laying seeds that stitches this event into the tapestry that is the story. As such, I think this is a very flat first episode, despite each individual scene being very well written. And in my opinion, that's because structurally it doesn't build towards anything substantial enough. Does that make it a bad episode though? I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with characters being stuck in a passive state. In fact, you need it at certain points in the story, and it's quite interesting to explore in and of itself. Why is it they're stuck? What's preventing them from moving forwards? Again, that itself is the core theme being explored for a lot of this season, so it makes sense it's not until about halfway through the season that things really kick into gear. I think a lot of what can make people feel like this season is boring is also exactly what's most interesting about it. Season 1 is tighter, it's more gripping and more fast paced and has loads of drive that can make this season feel weak in comparison, but maybe it's just different, trying different things. I find that quite endearing about it. I think it's much more unique. It's so much easier to just immediately give all of your characters a new threat to contend with, but to see the threat very gradually seep in across this season and very gradually force the characters out of the life they were attempting to cling to, that's a great idea. I obviously enjoy the theme of trying to process trauma even after the traumatic events have concluded. So yes, don't get me wrong, there is a lot that doesn't quite work. The execution of these more teaser moments, the introduction of characters like Max and Billy and Carly. There are issues with this episode, and with much of the season. In a way you didn't really get with season 1, but I still love the idea here. I still love the strengths we do get, and I don't think the weaknesses should outweigh them. However, I should actually talk about all of season 2 before I make such sweeping statements about it. That's the next video, because obviously there is a lot more to say. Look out for that one next, and like the video if you liked it. Comment your thoughts, good or bad, subscribe, maybe even support me on Patreon or buy me a coffee or become a channel member. Otherwise, hopefully see you next time. And as ever, a special thank you goes to Flying Spider, Luke Core, Michael Gallagher, Ben Marie, Thayfi, Chad Bramwell and Joshua C. Follier. Thank you. Stranger Things video. Stranger Things video.